don't go back to the slop. Don't go back to the prison of a life that does not fully depend on Jesus Christ. Christ did the work. Trust Him. If you take nothing else out of today's message, I want you to at least get this one thing. This is the big idea. This is the whole thing for the whole message. If you take nothing else, then please take this. Our faith in Christ determines our status with God. Our faith in Christ determines our status with God. Now, to understand that, we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at who we were before Christ. We're going to look at who we become after Christ. And we are also going to look at how that decision of following Christ should remind us of what our status is with God. Okay? So we're still in Galatians, and we're going to read chapter 4, verses 8 through 12 here. And this is for our first point. Point number one. Point number one is this. Remember how you were before Christ. Remember how you were before Christ. And it reads like this. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I'm afraid I may have labored over you in vain. Remember how you were before Christ. Now, I want to be very careful about how we hear this point. The point is to remember how we were before Christ, but I want to say this. The past is not something that we should live in and dwell in all the time, okay? We can't constantly stay there in the past. We shouldn't spend all of our time focusing on the negative or even the positive for that matter. If we're constantly living in the past, it just wouldn't be healthy. Now, if we did that, if we were to always just focus on the past, we could sit in sorrow of all of the bad things that happened or how terrible of a person we were before and all the bad decisions that we made, and that could lead to a cycle of depression or sadness or something like that. We're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, I did this thing back then, or oh my goodness, that was terrible. I was an awful person. Oh my goodness, these bad things happened to me, and we get stuck there. All right. However, it is good to look back for some perspective from time to time. And here in verse 8, Paul is saying, you used to be absolutely lost and misled by false gods. You were enslaved to this false reality, to a false religion, to a false belief. You had a false sense of security. And then he goes on in verse 9 to say, but then you met God. You met God and you heard the truth. God found you. God called you out. God rescued you from that enslavement. You were enslaved to weak, false, ignorant emptiness, and God saved you from it. But now it's like you want to go back to that false sense of security again. And Paul's pointing that out. And Paul is saying in verse 10, rather than putting your faith in Christ and what He did for you, now you're beginning to put your faith in these feasts and in these practices that came with the law. And he brings this up to the Galatians, who were focusing on carrying out the traditions and the rituals. When he's talking about you remember days and months and feasts, he's talking about the feasts that they're trying to keep in practice from the laws. And he's saying you're paying attention to that thing, to the traditions and to the rituals and these checklists of things. And you're trying to focus on things that you can do yourselves rather than focusing on what Jesus Christ did for you. In verse 11, Paul shares his worry that if they take that road, if they begin to put their faith into things that they can do themselves, if there was not truly a change of heart when they heard the one true gospel, if it sounded good, but now they want to do their part in helping Jesus save them, hear that, they want to do their part in helping Jesus save them, how ridiculous is that? If they're looking at salvation as a Jesus plus model, then Paul is worried that everything that he told them and everything that he shared with them went in one ear and out the other. Folks, don't be like the Galatians. Don't forget how lost you were before Christ. Don't forget how lost we all are without Jesus Christ. When we become anything other than 100% dependent on Christ for our salvation, it's like choosing to go back to enslavement. I remember hearing at church camp one time when I was in high school, a different take on the prodigal son. Now, many of us know that story of the prodigal son and how one of the sons spoiled rotten. He went to his father and he said, "Dad, give me my inheritance now. I don't want to wait until you're dead. Give it to me now. I want to take it and I want to go live life." So his father gave him his inheritance. He left. He goes off to a foreign land and he starts getting into fast living. He's partying and doing all kinds of things. But he soon finds himself out of money. He finds himself out of friends, he finds himself out of food, and he finds himself out of options. And so he goes and he looks for a job where he finds a job where he can take care of pigs. And as he's working with these pigs, which would have been absolutely detestable to the Jews, he starts looking at the pigs and he's with them and he's touching them and all of that. And he sees the food that they're getting, the slop that they're getting, and he starts to desire their food. And he wants that. He's so hungry that he wants that. Finally, after a while, he comes to his senses and he's like, "Man, everybody back home, even my dad's servants, they're living better than this. They're not eating pig slop. I'm going to go home. I'm going to ask for forgiveness." And so he goes back home, and his father, when he sees him, he welcomes him back. He opens his arm, he opens his home, and he says, "Hey, welcome back." And it is an awesome example of forgiveness, acceptance, and really rescue from a terrible situation, right? Now, I want you to imagine for a moment, this is the different take on it. I want you to imagine for a moment, though, that the son who was welcomed back in, the son who experienced absolute rock bottom, who had gone to a point of where he is desiring slop from pigs. And he comes back and he is forgiven and he's given a seat at the table and he's welcomed back in, and now life is good again. But I want you to imagine that he starts to think about those pigs that he had been with and the slop that he had desired while he was with them. And I want you to imagine that he began to think, I've got food, I've got all of my needs met, but maybe I should consider this slop some more. Maybe, what if he started to go out once a month, or once every other week, or once a week, every other day, every day? What if he starts going out in search of some of this slop so that he can make it a part of his diet, with the mindset of thinking, "Oh man, things are good right now, but what if things don't work out with my dad? What if he changes his mind? So I'm going to go ahead and get ahead of the curve here, and I'm going to start eating this slop again so that I'm used to it. Because that'll take care of me. I can always depend on that slop." How silly would that be? How ridiculous would it be if he were to take that mindset? Folks, don't go back to the slop. Don't go back to the prison of a life that does not fully depend on Jesus Christ. Christ did the work. Trust him. Remember how you were before Christ in order to appreciate what you have in Christ. Why? Because our faith in Christ determines our status with God.